Thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. I'm Samantha Manning here at West High School. Now, tonight's discussion is in response to the recent frustrations voiced by a number of Knox County school teachers, and tonight we're hoping to look at what's ahead for the school district and talk about some of the changes coming. Now, I'm joined by Superintendent of Knox County Schools, Dr. Jim McIntyre. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks, Samantha. My pleasure.
Now, here on the panel, we have Jessica McDonald, a teacher at Vine Middle Magnet and also a member of the teacher working group.
Yes, ma'am.
Jessica Holman, the interim principal at Inskip Elementary and also another member of the teacher working group and also the former president of the Knox County Education Association. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We have Vanita Williamson, another teacher at Carnes Middle and another teacher on the teacher working group, another member. Then we have Lauren Hopson, another member of that teacher working group, a teacher at Halls Elementary. And finally, Tanya Coats, the president of the Knox County Education Association. Thank you to everyone for joining us. So we want to start out by talking about the recent Board of Education meeting. Dr. McIntyre, you outlined a number of changes coming to the district in response to those teacher surveys. Let's start by talking about one change in particular. You talked about offering more choice to teachers when it comes to those classroom observations. Talk about how you came to that decision.
Sure. Samantha, I think it's probably important to put the whole conversation in a bit of context, and I think it's important to note that there's been a lot of change in public education in Tennessee and in the Knox County schools the last few years. If you think about where we were 5 years ago versus where we are today, we've seen significantly higher academic standards put in place, a new teacher evaluation system. There's been a push by the state of Tennessee to move towards strategic compensation, changes to tenure, changes to collective bargaining. There's been a lot of change in public education the last few years. I think much of it for very good reasons, to try to make sure we raise the bar in terms of our expectations and provide our students with an even higher quality education. But that's been, there's been some challenges in terms of so much change so quickly. And I think when you look at the work of effectively educating kids, it's complicated, it's nuanced, it's hard work. And I think as we move into the future, we see that our teachers are doing a terrific job of educating our children. And we see that by a variety of measures. Our TCAP scores for Knox County schools have been rising over the last few years. Our high school graduation rates have gone from 79% a few years ago to 88% this past year. Our Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System scores were level 5 for the district. And for the first time ever, we received straight A's on the state report card as a school system this past year. So our teachers are doing a great job. But again, there's been a lot of change, there's been a lot of transition, and I think that what, the conversation that we've been having over the last few months has been about how do we make sure that we give teachers the support that they need, the resources and tools that they need to be able to continue to do a great job in educating our kids, to make sure that they feel that they have the support that they need, and so that we can sustain the really strong academic progress that we've been making. And so specifically to your question in terms of the 11 action steps that I outlined to the Board of Education the other day, I think it was important for us to, first of all, hear from our teachers about what were some of the sort of the pain points, what were some of the areas where they thought some tweaks and adjustments were needed in order to be able to sustain the great work they're doing. And so we put in place this teacher work group, and each of the members of this discussion were members of that work group. It was a great discussion, a great dialogue. They made what I thought were some really smart recommendations, and one of them was to really give teachers more choice in the evaluation process and how that played out and the implementation of it, and also more voice in some of the decision making for the school system. So that's really what the focus of a lot of the recommendations the action steps that we put in place were. And hopefully through this conversation we'll outline most of what those action steps were, but they really focused on, in terms of both evaluation and assessment, giving more choice and voice to our teachers and supporting the great work that they're doing in our classroom, because they're doing, by virtually every measure, you see strong academic progress happening in our classrooms.
You mentioned those teacher working groups. We have several members here. Jessica, let's go to you. Talk to me a little bit about how much those classroom observations, how often that was discussed during these meetings with the teacher working group.
Well, over the course of the 3 meetings that we've had, I'd say the teacher observations probably took up a significant portion of it. And I think that just kind of speaks to how important that process is for both teachers and administrators. Lots of our teachers just had a lot of concerns around that, and our administrators as well, because it's an important part of our jobs, and so probably a good portion of the discussion was around that.
Now, Jessica, another outline that Dr. McIntyre had mentioned was getting rid of those tripod surveys, the student input surveys for the younger grades. Mm-hmm. Now, you as a teacher at middle school, this wouldn't necessarily affect your students. Is that fair? Do you think that this should have been eliminated for the kids in your grades as well?
I don't think that it's a fairness issue. I think it's where the data is worthwhile. And in the early grades, the students don't necessarily understand the questions they're asked, and even if they understand the words in the question, they may not understand the reason behind the question being asked, and older students do. Are we going to get data that's not always perfect and valid even from older students? They're human beings, and they have their own motivations and inclinations just like we do as adults. But I can take the data and work with it, take the information from my kids in a developmental way and see what makes sense to them, and balance that with what makes sense to me and what our goals are as a district and what my goal is as a teacher for my school and for my classroom. So I don't think of it as a fairness issue at all. I have a kindergartner in Knox County schools, and it never crossed my mind that she would take the tripod survey until she came home to tell me that they were asking her questions about her teacher in class that day. And I thought, really? You don't understand at all what's going on with this survey. And she still, before, during, and after, really just didn't have a clue, but was answering the questions because they said answer the questions. So even as a parent, I don't think K2 gives the right impression to the kids, to the parents, to the teachers, because they are so young. But older kids, they have an opinion about what's happening in the classroom, and they should have an opinion about what's happening in their classroom. It gives them a way to share that opinion, and it gives us a way to see what they think, balance that with what we know as professionals and as adults, and move forward with it.
You mentioned those stories about younger kids not necessarily understanding the questions, and we heard a lot about that throughout these meetings. In the teacher working groups, Vanita, have teachers been able to be candid and share those kinds of stories?
Definitely.
There was no lack of candor, right?
Yeah, we were pretty open.
No one held back anything, and no topics were off limits. Basically, everyone said exactly what they wanted to say and brought up the points that they wanted to say within the reason of. We were talking about evaluations and assessment. We've only met 3 times, so we needed to keep it on the hot topics, and we did. Everyone spoke. I'll tell you, from the very first night that we met, I personally had a great feeling about it. Before we met, I didn't know who was going to be on it. I didn't know how it was going to go. Once I got there and we all started talking, it turned out to be better than I could have ever hoped it would have been. We don't always agree either with one another, but we at least, we're adults and we say what we want to say, and we try to represent our friends and our colleagues, and that's what I think everybody's trying to do, and also just trying to move forward and let's get successful now. Let's move forward and not take any steps backwards. And I really feel like it has. I can't believe we've only met 3 times. Honestly, it's pretty amazing.
Agree with that.
And I feel like everybody's from such a varied school environment, and I think that's good. Because I'm middle school, but I really didn't know everything that was going on in elementary school. So I also didn't. I'm in the largest middle school, so I also didn't know what all was going on in the smallest elementary school. So it's been really eye-opening. But it's been great, and I'm really glad that we're continuing it for the remainder of the year. So,
Now, in the past, we've heard from teachers who said that they've had opportunities to offer input, but they didn't necessarily feel that that input was being listened to. Now, Lauren, you're on the teacher group as well. Since the start of things, let's say a couple of months back when teachers really started voicing their concerns, have you noticed that teachers now are being listened to? Do you get that sense?
Well, the thing is, it didn't really start just a couple months ago. I think teachers have been voicing these concerns for several years now. I know I have. The first time that I spoke before the board was in 2012, and I voiced some very specific concerns about our evaluation system, and I got absolutely no reaction from the board or from Dr. McIntyre. And we've had numerous public forums. You know, Dr. McIntyre has come to have lunch with teachers at several schools, and I don't know that anything we discussed in the teacher work group was news to him. And so I think it's just been a matter of it taking so long. And so even though some things have come out of the working group, I still think there's a lot of skepticism that enough things are going to be changed as quickly as they need to be. For instance, when we were discussing all the testing that's done in the different schools, especially in elementary, I think we're hit particularly hard. We made extensive lists of all the tests, but then when the recommendations came out, there were only 3 tests that were really targeted, 2 of which we haven't even given yet. So while it's nice to not have to give those in the spring, really we only had 1 set of tests that was taken off our plate. So out of all the tests that we listed and discussed in depth, we really only, got 1 of them taken off our plate that's currently part of what we're doing.
So it sounds like it's not enough at this point. It's a start, but you are still hoping that more will be done, especially when it comes to the testing.
Absolutely.
Is that the sort of sense you get from teachers as a whole? I mean, you do represent the Knox County Education Association, or is this the beginning, but teachers are still waiting for more?
I know that teachers know that this is the beginning. I can agree to a point what Lauren just stated, that there's been some voices of concern over the years. However, it just came to a head, if you would say, this year, and that teachers really feel that something is actually being done. So when the report was out, it was almost like a win for teachers, because it was actually a checklist, something that it was written, and that we're going to stick to it. And I think it was a positive thing that the school board, along with Dr. McIntyre's recommendations, to move forward to make sure that we're getting these things that teachers, and given this choice. And choice is just, it may seem minute to the masses, but it's a big thing for teachers. So I think it's a positive step into making sure that the teachers are feeling this, this one piece of making that autonomy in the classroom come to fruition for them.
And if I can build on that, I think that, as I said, before, our teachers are doing a great job. We're very fortunate in the Knox County schools to have just terrific teachers in our classrooms that are doing a great job. They've kept their focus squarely on our students through all of this change, and you can see that reflected in the results that we see for our children. And I think when we really dug into some of the challenges and concerns that have been raised by teachers, what we wanted to do was be able to try to address some of those concerns, but to be very clear that we weren't going to compromise our high standards and rigorous expectations that we've put in place. We've really, as a school system, as a state, we've come too far and improved too much and shown too many enhancements that are having a positive impact for kids to be able to go backward. And so I think where we came to was this idea that really within the systems and the structures that we have in place, we want to make sure that our teachers do have the choice to make good decisions, good instructional decisions within their classroom, and to have a voice in a lot of the important decisions that we're making instructionally and as a school system. And I do think that's an ongoing conversation. I think the 11 action steps that we've put in place now, I think speak to that and give choice and voice to our teachers in a lot of different ways. But I think it's an ongoing conversation. When the teacher survey came out, that's something that I put in place because I wanted to hear from our teachers about their insights and their perspectives, and that's one of many avenues that we use to try to hear from our employees, from our community, and other stakeholders. But one of the things that came out in that survey was we asked a question about how teachers felt about instructional autonomy if they felt constrained or limited in terms of their ability to use professional judgment in the classroom. And a good number of our teachers said yes, they did feel some constraints and some limitations in terms of being able to make good instructional decisions in their classroom. And to me, that was one of the answers to that survey that was fairly disconcerting, because one of the great I think one of the places where our teachers add the most value in terms of the great work that they do is in the talent and the creativity that they bring to the classroom to be able to provide great instruction for our kids. So I've asked the teacher working group to continue the conversation with me as a teacher advisory committee for the rest of this year, and that's one of the areas I really want to dig into and talk more about, is that the notion of how do we make sure that our teachers feel like they have the autonomy, the flexibility, within the high expectations that we have, to be able to provide great instruction to our kids.
You mentioned those teacher surveys, and the lack of autonomy was definitely a part of it, but I think the bigger sense of the surveys was the overwhelming feeling that teachers don't feel valued enough in the school district, that they aren't appreciated enough. And there were a number of criticisms against the school board and against you, Dr. McIntyre. Just a couple, just to read off directly from the surveys. There was an elementary school teacher who wrote that the school board and district leaders are out of touch with what teachers do and what they need. Another teacher wrote that teachers feel persecuted. And then one elementary school teacher wrote, and this is a quote, "I feel bullied by the superintendent." Mm-hmm. Dr. McIntyre, hearing that, how does that make you feel?
Well, certainly, there were 161 pages of comments from teachers, and so those are 3 out of about 1,700 that we heard from teachers. So,
but it is fair to say a lot of them did feel that they weren't valued enough, and while these are 3 quotes, there were many comments indicating that teachers did feel out of touch with the school district.
I think that there was certainly a theme around wanting to feel that we respect the professional judgment of our teachers, that our teachers want to feel more valued in the work that they do. I think there's no question about that. And I think that's, again, an area where if you look at the 11 action steps that we've taken, it begins to address some of those questions. But I think it's, this isn't the beginning of the conversation, and it certainly isn't the end of the conversation, is the way I like to characterize it. I mean, this is an ongoing dialogue, and I think it's one that I feel strongly we need to get right. I think, again, we're very fortunate to have extraordinary educators in the Knox County schools, and we need to make sure that they feel supported, that they feel valued, so that they continue to do the great work that they do with their kids. Now, there's also some positives in that survey. When we asked teachers if they felt like their school was a great place to work and to learn, about 80% of our teachers said yes. So yes, so there's a lot to improve upon and grow from in the survey, but there are also some encouraging results as well.
When it comes to that sense of a low morale, Lauren, you've been pretty outspoken at these meetings about the need to change that. Talk about what needs to happen in order for that to start to change.
Well, we have to see some very concrete steps by the school board and Dr. McIntyre that really back up what they're saying. One example that I can give you quite directly, Dr. McIntyre, you had just made the statement that you did not want to compromise the high standards and the rigorous expectations for our school system. And that was a quote that you had put into the last email that you had given us, and I think you had stated that one time before. And both times in that email, that statement was boldface and underlined. Mm-hmm. And I took it almost as personally as an insinuation that some of the things that teachers are asking for would be lowering our rigorous expectations. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken with many teachers in the last 2 days who have really been offended by that comment, because to put that in such a bold statement, it really says to us that you think things we're asking for are going to make our school system worse. And that is just not true. And so a lot of teachers, even though you can say that you respect us and you can praise us for the valuable job that we're doing, those little things that creep in from time to time, I just think makes people question your sincerity with that.
No, and I think the reason that I emphasize that is because the work that we do is around educating our children and making sure that they're prepared for their future. And I actually emphasize that because I believe that our teachers agree with me on that point, that our standards must be high, that our expectations must be rigorous if we're going to be successful in this important work of preparing our kids for a successful and bright future. So the emphasis was really because I felt there'd be strong agreement that we need to have high expectations in place, and there are a lot of things that we can do that will help support our teachers in doing this work while continuing to maintain those high standards and expectations that I think are incredibly important to the future of our kids, the future of our community, and the future of our state, quite honestly.
And I think teachers would agree that they want high standards, but when 70-some% of the teachers in Knox County are saying on a survey that they don't feel their professional judgment is valued, then there's some kind of disconnect between what you're saying and how teachers are taking it, and whether or not they feel that you're sincere about those statements. So something has to be done to fix that disconnect. I don't know what the answer to that is yet, but something has to be done.
One thing I'd like to add, if I may, as a school administrator who's also on the teacher work group, since all of these broad sweeping changes have come to our state as a result of Race to the Top, I've been an administrator in 3 different schools in 3 years. So I think that kind of offers me a unique perspective. And serving in those 3 schools as a principal under these changes, I can honestly tell you that teachers in all 3 schools have all said virtually the same thing, and that's this: the changes are difficult, they're hard, change is hard in general, they've been on a steep learning curve, but at the same time, they are in favor of the heightened, the standards. We're asking our kids to do more, we're holding parents more accountable, in ways that we can. They're seeing almost kind of the fruits of their labor, if you will, right now, since we're in year 3 of all this. So there's been some positive, and I agree with the part Dr. McIntyre said about the teachers feeling, the teachers in those 3 schools where I worked, they all have said, this is hard, but we see the benefit of it. I'd also kind of like to add too, and as far as this work group and continuing our work for the remainder of the school year, in education, we talk a lot about partnerships, partnerships with parents, partnerships with the community. I really think that what we're doing now is certainly a step in the right direction. I think for a district our size, it's really unique to have a group of teachers that meet regularly with the top leadership on these issues, because I come from Memphis, which is a very large school system. I was born and raised there, and so it's very rare for a system our size to have that opportunity. So I think, I agree with Ms. Hopson that our work is certainly not done. I think there's a lot more room for improvement in some areas, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And in a short amount of time, because, this group convened in December, and it's now January. So I think in a short amount of time, we've seen a good start to some action. So I just think, while we're not done, I think that's certainly a good step. Just we need to continue and build on the progress that we've made in a short amount of time, because there are a lot of issues, and I agree that some of this has kind of been ruminating for a while, but we're on a path to repairing it.
And I can agree with Ms. Holman. I think the collaboration efforts that we've had over this past year have been just as fast-paced as the changes not only in Knox County but in the state. And change is hard, as I heard you say, that it is hard. But however, when we work together, you can see that having this working group as teachers in this district, we had this voice, okay? So we work together with the administration of Knox County and the teachers having this voice. This collaboration, if people could see the bigger picture, if we're working together, if we continue to work together as a group, the benefits are not only going to be for the teachers, but it's going to be beneficial for the students. And I just perceived the email as being that's something that we want to make sure that we are striving for, to make sure that the students are high achieving at every moment or voice that we have, or every breath that we take, that we need to make sure that that our eye on the prize is for the students and nothing else. But in regards to the survey, I'm going to back up in regards to the morale. it was hard for me. I taught in the classroom for over 12 years, and then I changed to being a coach. That was hard for me. I probably cried a couple of first 2 or 3 days if I can reflect back upon that. I thought I'd rather go back to the children, and then stepping into the position of being the president of the Teachers Association. I cried about that. So I was thinking, this is rough around here. But someone has to, you have to step up to the occasion, and you got to be willing to work with people on a collaborative effort. And if you're not willing to work together, then I think it'd be time to step away from it and just say, this is not going to work for me. Because it's not about Tanya anymore. Again, I always think about the students, even though now in my role I think about the teachers. It's hard. We're in a hard place. And I've told Dr. McIntyre, when I've talked with him, not told him, but I've said that, you get fingered out as being the mean old superintendent. If you want to take that mean old superintendent role, then you're going to be the mean old superintendent until we can figure out a way that we can come together and agree and make sure that we're doing what's best for everyone in this district. Yeah.
And if I may, I so much of what you said, I have been thinking along those lines. Like my opinion and my willingness to share it with anyone who wants to know the answer to a question, that's not new. I've had the opinions about what can we change and what can we do and how do we do it and who do I talk to get this information or these ideas flowing for years. This is my 8th year in Knox County, and I worked in a smaller county in Florida before this, where although the district was a quarter of the size, it had very much the same bureaucratic tendency. So Memphis being larger doesn't necessarily fix that. There's still this wall between the teachers and the administration. And then there's even more of this impenetrable wall between the teachers and the district office, right? It's this big special thing. And
it shouldn't be that way.
It shouldn't be
that way.
It shouldn't be. So when the conversation started to happen this school year, the teacher working group is not the first opportunity I've had. Dr. Elizabeth Alves also has been holding some focus groups with Common Core issues, with our school technology challenge. She's holding a focus group on that coming up soon to get teachers' input on where we stand, what's good, what's not good, what do we do to move forward. And I have been kind of in a daze with it. Like, do they really want to know? And it is the first time in my career of 12 years that I feel like people are listening, that people besides the other teachers down the hall from me are listening, and I don't really care what made it change, if I'm being honest. I am just so glad that they want to know what we think, and even if nothing came of it, we can all say that we tried. And I think that's a really positive thing from the teacher standpoint. That's the message I've been trying to share, is I really honestly feel like it's finally just a conversation that the district office is willing to have with us. So why not have the conversation and try to make it positive and move forward together? Because that's a really strange and different feeling than anything I've ever experienced in public education. And so there will always be an inherent mistrust for anyone who's not been in the profession less than 6 months. Those of us who've been in it, we know what it feels like to kind of be shut out of that decision-making process and to wonder where everything comes from. But we'd love to be part of it. And that doesn't make all of our opinions and input correct. You know, there are teachers that want it to just go back to being as easy as it was 25 years ago, and
I don't know that it was ever easy, though.
No, but it's really hard all of a sudden with all of the changes, and probably just because it's change, maybe teachers who came into it with this being the status quo don't feel the way we feel about it. But as things change and we have to constantly adjust and learn and stretch further, it's hard, and that doesn't make it wrong. I just want to feel like if I have an idea or an opinion that's valid and informed, there's someone there listening and considering it. You don't have to agree with me
But
ever.
at the same
I
time,
just
it's
want to
not-
feel like it's a conversation, and I do this year so far.
I just think
Which
there
is
needs
great.
to be, we need to really, Dr. McIntyre talked about how fast things have been moving.
Yeah.
And with that, we need to be very careful about the changes that are coming. Are they just hard because they're different, or are they the right thing to do? Some things that have been different this year, they're challenging because they are new, and I don't have a problem with some of those changes. Some of the changes and things that we're being asked to do, I think, are just plain wrong, and they are not what's good for kids. And so I think they have been implemented without a lot of thought from the student's perspective or the classroom teacher's perspective. And I think we have to be very careful, about which
Right.
things are just challenging because they're new, and which things are challenging because they're not what we ought to be doing.
Only if we can have control over them. That's the difference. Because sometimes things that come to the district level, we don't have control over them. And I think about it on our perspective as being the Teachers Association, that we have to comply with some of the craziest things, but if you don't comply, it's better to comply with it and try to work to make it better than to fight against it. And that's where I hope that this collaboration would come, and I hope that we continue to work on that.
Well, I even have a different view of that too, because I do think we have control over things by speaking up, by the way we vote, by being active with our representatives to the state legislature, and even above that. And sometimes I think when teachers step back and take the perspective of, we'll just do what they tell us and we'll just make it work no matter what, whether we agree with it or not, then that's kind of giving up some of our power as citizens. And so I think we do have some control, and I think that in recent years teachers maybe haven't used that power that they have the way they should have. And I think now is the time for teachers to start realizing that they do have the power to control some things.
So just going back to what Ms. McDonald said, I think that the school board and I have, I think, struggled to find the right sort of venues for getting feedback. We've done lots of community meetings. We've done these smaller group things called teacher talks. We've tried to find the right avenue for dialogue with teachers. And I feel like this teacher working group has actually been a really productive structure where it's a real conversation. It's a real dialogue around, really, I think, our interests are always about how do we make sure we provide the best possible education for our children. But what has happened in this conversation has been really to bring the insights and the perspectives directly from the classroom to that conversation and that dialogue, which I think has been really healthy, really productive. And I think it's led to some wonderful dialogue, and I think it's led to some action steps that are going to help us continue to do the great work that our teachers are doing with our children in the classroom and continue to get the kind of great results that we're seeing for our kids.
And heated discussions.
Because we haven't always
Real quick
agreed.
comment.
Sure.
I said it was heated.
I also wanted to say too, and as I'm listening to the conversation, I'd like to add one of the things I've noticed, because I was a teacher in the district when Dr. McIntyre came to Knox County, and when he came to Knox County, he's always been open with communicating with the community, hosting community forums. Parents would come, teachers would come, administrators would come, but this group it just feels different because we are different. I would attend some of the community forums as a teacher. I attended most of them or all of them when I was KCA president during my term. And then as an administrator, I would attend as an administrator. And, teachers have been voicing some hard and fast, opinions at those meetings for years. But we would go home feeling like, oh, well, I'm not sure that's going anywhere. I'm not sure if anyone's listening. Or people would feel, fearful for their losing their job or whatever. But this group feels different because I look at us as kind of like the district problem solvers, providing that voice, being directly in the front lines and a direct mouthpiece to Dr. McIntyre to say, I'm in the classroom and this is what I'm dealing with. This is what's happening down the hall in my school. And knowing that there's going to be some action, and there's no fear of I'm not going to have a job, but there's action that's going to come out of that. So I think that's why this is so different, and it certainly is. I'm very motivated and moved by it because I think it's just a different feel. So
On that note, I do want to say we are out of time, but I want to thank you all for for joining us today. I do think this was a great discussion, and hopefully it'll help the district move in the right direction towards helping the students, because that's what
Thank
it's
you.
about. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Thank
everyone
you.
for watching.